Hello, and thank you for tuning in to the Flatirons Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. This show is brought to you by Flatirons Tuning, your source for any aftermarket or OEM Subaru parts. Be sure to check out our store at flatirons.com and stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning.
Well, welcome back, everybody. This is episode number 65 of the Flatirons Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. We've got Ryan in his top secret location. Scotty is currently out in the wild in the back behind the shop. And boy, I am still like trying to wrap my head around getting back in the shop and getting caught up. So I do not have really a whole lot on my mind, but I wanted to throw it out to you guys. You guys have anything on your minds or on your plate that you wanted to discuss today?
Well, I think the excitement of Super Lap has got seems like everybody here in Colorado is super pumped about the season.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm sure you guys have gotten some phone calls about, hey, I want to get all the stuff that Ryan Dusix has, and I want 3 of them, like in the Fast and the Furious. Maybe not quite, but
I want to overnight parts from Boulder, Colorado. Cannot tell you how many times we've had people, and we tell them, you're in Colorado, just regular ground it gets you the next day.
Yeah.
We don't have to put it on a plane. And they're like, but it's cooler if you put it on a plane.
Yeah.
I get it. Sure.
So with all that stuff happening, I actually have a guy who races with SCCA, Ben Martin, and he's had all kinds of problems with his 2015, just like head gaskets, and then they put head gaskets on, but they milled the heads a ton, and then he was having knock and having all kinds of issues. And David Cryotune was like, man, it could be your block, it could be your heads. So he kind of made the big jump and bought pretty much brand new heads, brand new RA short block, and I'm literally looking at a pile of parts over here on this table that just looks super intimidating.
And his Cusco diff is on the way.
Heck yeah. I know he'll be. It's funny, he texted me and said, hey, man, and so I posted a video, just a quick little clip, because I thought it was crazy that I was getting sideways out of that corner onto the front stretch. And so I just posted that clip because there's just so, you're so close and my hands are so big. I was had to take the hand off the wheel,
Mm-hmm.
And he sent me a message after that video and said, hey, so do you think I need an LSD? I'm like, well, I mean, you had a torsion one, but are you asking if I think you need a clutch type? Because yes, I think you do. And he's like, well, what do you think it makes that much of a difference? That video I just posted where I'm basically on the power and the car tracks out perfect and just goes? I was like, yeah. I was like, that's the clutch type.
Mm-hmm.
That made, it makes all that big of a difference.
Man, you know what? I realized as you said that. So we alluded to the fact that we were doing something with the car, but I never actually clarified what we did, which is we put a clutch type diff in the car right before we went out to Coda. Dave at Rally Spec did us a solid, and I sent him the Cusco diff, and he magic, he got it, and then the next day he calls me up and all right, it's ready to go. Already? Okay, cool. And then he shipped in, so we put it in. But in part because we had talked to you, I remember your experience when you went out to Coda the first time or second time where you had the torque biasing diff and then you switched back to the clutch type because it was just, you could tell how much tire or wheel slip you were getting. And for our run last year at Pikes Peak, there's that now famous video where Scott kind of loses it a little bit right below Glen Cove, and people caught that. But the reason that the car, you saw it kind of wag a little bit, is because it's got the torque biasing diffs, and there was rain on the road at that point. And it just, with those kinds of diffs, you just don't have the control in the slide that you do with the clutch type diff. Yeah. So those two factors, plus knowing what the next iteration of the car is going to be down the road, where we definitely need a clutch type diff, is all right, it's time. Let's just put it in there.
See, and I think I find it kind of weird that so the Nürburgring STI, they still claim that they're running the torsion diff in there. I have a feeling they're not, but that's what they claim, that they're just running the stock torsion style diff. And I have a feeling like I said, that they're not, because I mean, motorsport grade STI racing around the Nürburgring for 24 hours, it rains there. You would think that they would want something that holds up a little better. I think that the idea of having a clutch style diff in any motorsport application is very beneficial. I mean, regardless of autocross or time trial racing, regardless of what it is, if you're in one of these cars, I think it makes a huge difference. And we've all experienced it, you know, like the wheel slip coming out of turn 2 at high planes, where it's, you know, you're loaded up on the brake turning, and you turn in and you're trying to get back on the power, and the ass end is lifting a little bit, and you can just hear that wheel spinning. And as soon as I went to a clutch style diff, I mean, how time was dropping just because I could get on the power and get out of that corner faster. So,
but it's worth mentioning that before you did that, you didn't realize that it was the diff.
Will you go grab my coffee? Correct. Yeah.
You heard this sound, and I remember we were watching the video, and we spent a lot of time watching the video. Like, what is this sound? Like you were going around a corner, and you just hear this, zzz, and then like, what is that? And like finally came to realize that it was like your car was just loading up in the corner and lifting up, just taking enough weight off the inside wheel that you were getting wheel spin in the back. And then finally, once you realize that and put the torque or the clutch type diff in, then problem solved. But we've had other people, I would say, I could at least say 2 or 3 with 100% certainty that have called us up. One guy I know for 100% dead certain that he called us up because he needed a clutch. It's because his clutch was slipping. And so I started talking to him about, well, where is it slipping? He says, well, it's only when I'm driving on track, and it's only if I'm going on these uphill corners. But as soon as I go on this uphill corner, you know, I can feel the clutch slipping, and then I, you know, straighten the car out, and then it locks up, and then I go on. It's like, that's actually your rear diff. That's not your clutch. It's like, no, it's totally my clutch. I mean, I hear the RPMs go. I'm like, yes, because your rear axle is spinning and the RPM is. He's like, well, no, but I have a limited slip diff back there in my STI. I'm like, no, you don't. You have a torque biasing diff, and it's not the same as a clutch type diff. And so it's those clutch type diffs.
It's still a limited slip. I mean, it's that's what Subaru calls it. It comes with a limited slip differential, and it works great for, I mean, 75% of all applications. But you know, in a motorsport grade application, you need something that puts that power to the ground. So
and it's those. I think there's just that nomenclature leads to a misunderstanding, and just lumping all of the possible things together as being the same, but they're not the same. They all have little differences, because there's the viscous, there's the torque biasing, there's the clutch type, and they all have little differences. But it's, you know, if you just call them all the same thing, then you don't realize that there is something there worth noting. But like those clutch type diffs, if you get that set up right, like that, we've had this conversation about rally cars. And then like you figuring out the front diff, the rear diff, the setup makes a world of difference, because that car spends half of its time on stage sliding, and that gives you the control. That gives you the ability to really kind of hold that car where you want it to be and carry more momentum through. And it's that combination of diffs that's the key to do that. But I think that with road race applications, it's a little bit, it's something that people either leave towards last or just don't think that it's hurting them as much as it might be. You know, there's, you know, theory that, like, just stick your tires. That's all you need.
That's one of those things about, like, people who first start tracking an STI. I mean, again, 75-80% of a stock STI is
how does he have a bad internet
start finding when you find the limits of the stock brake calipers?
Well, and the other really interesting.
Was I cutting out?
You were cutting out. You're cutting out for us.
Yeah. So you guys were cutting out for me. So there. But so I was saying, like the stock Brembos, you know, they work just fine until you realize that they don't work that well anymore. The rear diff, there's a lot of things, chassis bracing, things like that. There's things on these cars that are good until you realize you find the limit of them.
I would say it's worth saying that the STI is a really capable car, and like at a entry level to like medium level tracking of the car, the brakes are sufficient, the diffs are sufficient. You're definitely starting off at a much higher level with both transmission and the brakes than any WRX thus far. So you can get up there, but then like to really like make the car into a competition car, that's where addressing the brakes and like getting something like a clutch type diff, especially in the rear, that's where it makes a big difference in the STI still.
Well, and so Brett has a 15 plus WRX, and he just called us. He's another one of your cronies, right?
Yeah, Brett Cartuccio.
Yep. So he has a 15 plus WRX, and that is essentially an open rear differential.
Yeah.
And
it is an open. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, he called. We're getting him a Cusco 1.5 weight limited slipper diff in there, and that's going to make that car come alive. I don't think that guy had any idea what he was missing. As soon as he drives that car with that new diff, it's going to be world changing for him.
Yeah,
I'm telling you, so this 10 or 3 class that's running with SCCA time trials. It's like an arms race. So it's like, well, what's Ben doing? Okay, well, what was Trey's car set up like last year? Because they all want to beat Trey's time.
Right.
They're all trying to beat each other, and it's literally like, well, what do you got going on? So as soon as one dude, Brett, so he has like a 2020, so it started with an R167 or whatever those weird diffs are. He went and found an R160 with the same final drive so that he could actually find a diff to put in it, because we were looking and we couldn't find anything except for like this weird hybrid diff that Cusco makes for basically automatic transmission Laborgs and stuff over in Japan. And so he's it's an arms race. So like he's trying to get a diff. Then Ben's like, well, do I need a diff? I'm like, yeah, you really need a diff. Here's the reason why. And then Brett, those dudes called, like, I'm assuming on the same day, because they must have been talking to each other even. And they know, like, this guy, Jeffrey West, has got a diff. He's going in with a fresh engine. Ben's going in with a fresh engine. Do I need a diff? Brett Cartuccio's trying to source a diff. Like, all these dudes are like, and they're all competing against each other. It's literally an arms race. And Brett was with his open diff behind Ben. He was 17 thousandths of a second off of him at La Junta, like 0.017 seconds. And so those dudes, if everybody steps their tire game up, then what's that? It's like, oh, if I don't have this and they do, shit, I'm gonna. That's a gap, and it's really wild right now. It's super crazy to me.
Man, when you've got some people that you're close to, you're putting down close times with, you're competing with, you're vying for position. Like that's where everybody starts looking for an edge, whatever that might be.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's something like that. Down the road, it's going to make a big difference. The other example, like, again, proof of how much of a difference a clutch type diff can make, that I'm thinking Scotty here, is Drew Brown, because he had it was a 19 STI, and he's going out on high planes, and he kept getting the car kept going into limp mode because the rear diff was overheating, because it has a temperature sensor on the rear diff. And so that car, he was turning off the traction control in the VDC, but like it's probably back there in the background, like you can't like fully turn it off, even if you disable it. And it kept overheating. And like one of the things in talking it through is like that with those newer cars that actually have the yaw control, it's using the rear brake calipers with basically to do that, to actively trying to help you go around corners. But in doing that, it's also putting a little bit more stress on that rear diff, because the rear diff is in between those two brakes that might be engaging one wheel or the other to try and get the car to go around
1,000 times a second, basically.
Yeah.
And so he put in a clutch type diff, and that fixed the problem, because all of a sudden now the wheels aren't slipping. So the yaw control doesn't think it has to come in and intervene, and then the temperature's dropped.
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah,
There's so much technology in these cars.
It was an interesting head scratcher because like the initial question and talk that we had with him was, okay, well, what are the temperatures actually getting to, and is it really something that is an issue? And it's like if you're using a good synthetic fluid, like the temperatures that it was getting into is like low to like 220, 230 degrees or something like that.
Okay.
Like it wasn't something where it was like, yeah, you're going to be melting stuff, but it was like for whatever reason, Subaru put in this threshold where you just go into limp mode. And
and so with my VI also has a temp sensor on there. So we started trying to figure out what's the difference between the older cars and the newer cars. And then it's just the electronics. It's just the added yaw control that they added in there. And yeah, I mean, it took us quite a while to figure out why his car was overheating, because they're essentially the same diff I have in my car with absolutely no issues ever.
Yeah.
In the 10 years I've been tracking it. So
yeah. But it's because of the cost, because like especially in the transmission, having to put in a front diff, like that is not a small or easy thing to do. I think that's a big reason why people kind of leave playing around with the diffs down the road, but like it really does make a big difference.
Oh yeah. Does the new SCIs, do they have like open front diffs, like, or are they torque bias? Or
the SCI has had a torque biasing front diff since I want to say 2006.
Okay, cool.
I think they had, it might have actually been 05. The 04 definitely has a clutch type that is very loose, so it does not really engage much. And then I think it was in 06 that they switched up to the torque biasing diff in the front.
I'm sure somebody's going to correct us in the comments.
Yeah.
I just figured like once like 2008 hit, where you kind of see like this, I wouldn't say decline, but like selective performance parts in the STIs, where it's taking more of like a commercial approach. I thought maybe they got rid of the front LSD.
That's the thing
good,
of it is that front torque biasing diff and the DCCD, that is the special sauce that makes an STI an STI. Because like in my WRX, I have a front torque biasing diff, and when I put that in there, I still have the stock center diff, but I put that torque biasing diff in there, and it changed the WRX. To me, it changed it significantly. It all of a sudden felt like I was driving more like an STI, much more confidence in grip up front and confidence on the throttle, like what the STI feels like. And I think that's the special sauce. So yeah, I don't think they will ever go away from that, because that's one of those things that you don't realize how significant it is until you like put in a WRX that didn't have it or something.
I definitely have. I've had a couple different front diffs, but one of the ones I had was just like a modified preload stock diff up front. And I remember when we put that diff in, like you couldn't push the car anything other than straight, which unfortunately in 2019 we had to push the car a lot. But as soon as you start to turn the wheel, you could feel it binding up in the front end.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, yeah, and that's with the modified, factory clutch type. So, or not clutch type, factory torsion. So, and I went to, I have a Cusco one way right now in the blue car, and I thought I was going to be breaking axles all the time. It feels like when the fluid's cold, man, that thing is like, I'm like, oh my God, please don't break an axle, turning around in the paddock and stuff.
Yeah.
You get off track and everything's warmed up and stuff, and it was fine. But man, it was aggressive in the paddock.
Yeah. We have front and rear Cusco diffs in the rally car and have for a long time. And pulling that into the shop, it makes some clatter. Like it sounds like the drivetrain is going to snap and just jump out from underneath the car and start fighting you. But it's like it's done that for about the last 10 years, and it's okay. Yeah. It's just what it does.
Yeah, for sure. It is pretty funny though.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, definitely an arms race. I mean, Ben's also got. I'm looking at coilovers, front mount intercooler, gauges, fluids, all kinds of crazy shit over there. And I think a big part of it is it's about trying to keep up. And I mean, Trey did great last year with his STI. He's got that 2020. And I know that part of, other than just beating each other, they're also looking at trying to beat Trey's times. And Trey's still on that torque, like the factory diff. And now he's at 400 horsepower and max. And I told him, he was the first person I said, dude, you want to get an LSD, you want to get like a clutch type limited slip. I was like, because this 400 horsepower thing, it's going to feel slow. I don't know. It's just, you're not going to realize all the power,
Yep.
And does he have one?
Corners.
Does
No,
Trey have
no.
one?
Trey, if you're listening
And
to this,
you can't take him into one yet, huh?
he's
Trey.
Well,
he
time.
needs to get one. Trey,
it's one of those.
Get it done.
It's going to be one of those things. If he's following a guy, or if he sees one of those guys behind him, and his car is just waggling or just not holding the same line as these other guys, it's like, if you're wondering what the difference is, well, spoilers, that's the difference.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's he might well be okay. It's one of those things like that. That's the cool thing about how much excitement there is now for people to get back to the track. Like there's going to be a lot more people that are going to be at the track, bring out their cars. There's going to be a lot more people out there to dice with and see what's working, see who's fast, and then try and figure out what they've done that's different than what you've done, and so on.
Yeah. I think Subaru wise, he's pretty solid. I don't think he's worried about Subarus per se, but he's got like an Audi and a couple of other like high profiles. Hell, Dustin Neal, he's got a 335 BMW, and he just had it tuned, and that thing put down like 640 wheel horsepower. And I've already talked him into a clutch type dip last year, and he was like, "Oh my god, like the car feels so slow now." I'm like, "Yeah, because it's not like just, I mean, it's actually pushing the car. I mean, your speeds are faster, but it's like a funny sensation." And now he's going to have all that power with that diff, and like Trey doesn't realize it, but I mean, he's going to have to get that. He's going to be chasing arms race too. Even Keith Popolski in that Audi TT got a new Haldex, and like a fancy one. And before that car, it's funny seeing him do the track sprint a month ago. He was basically just like launching. He's like, man, I can't believe how much harder the car launches. And a big part of it's because now the new diff is really engaging the rear end a lot sooner. And he was going over through these curbs, and he was romping on it, and the car was just spin out. And he's like, this is totally different. I was like, yeah. I was like, you're not a front-wheel drive Audi most of the time. You're like an all-wheel drive Audi now most of the time, because the Haldex are just so slow to respond. You know, they're very lazy. And now he's got like a whole new world, with this new diff, and he's got power, and Dustin's got power. And I think, do you guys know who Colton Nixon is? He's a guy, and he runs Optima in a Corvette, and he's a local dude. I think he's Colorado Springs local, and he just put in a Texas speed motor in that thing, and so he's going to be running in the same class, and he's got aero. He's going to be running the same class with Trey. So yeah, I mean, Trey's going to have to. Trey doesn't realize that he's like, these Subaru guys, man, I've got them. I was like, but you've got all these other cars, basically going to be throwing down the gauntlet, and so it'll be pretty interesting. So
what class is Corey in?
Corey Ross. He's in Unlimited.
Okay.
So he's in Unlimited 1, and I'm in Unlimited 2. But he's in there mostly because of the. It's like a fully gutted car,
right?
So. He's pretty fast. I mean, he was still faster than me last year in my yellow car. So, but they're not. These Max cars are still like pretty much full interior cars. So these Max cars, with the exception of safety, so like if you look at Dustin Neal's car, his interior is pretty well gutted, but he's got like an FIA style cage that is built by Hank's Hot Rod. So he's got like a beautiful, super baller, expensive cage. So he's got some weight reduction interior wise, but like where they don't let you do interior weight reduction without safety improvements. So Trey's still like no cage, full interior, and everybody's on 200 treadwear tires.
Wow.
So it'll be interesting. I mean, obviously it takes a lot more than power. Trey's a damn good driver, but sometimes 200 horsepower is a lot to overcome. You know,
Yeah. And it seems
especially
like
when you
this
can't
year,
put power down.
yeah. And it seems like this year, I think there's more people out in 2021 than 2020. But I think in 2022, it seems like everybody's like ready. Like, all right, let's do this. I mean, I'm finally like, all right, I need to get back to the track. It's been too long. I need to literally get all of the layers of dust and weeds that are growing on the car off and shake it all down and try and get out there. I think 2022 is going to be a really good year for getting to the track.
Yeah. And not to mention the weeds and dust growing on your brain, because it's been how long since you've been to the track?
I don't even know.
Say too damn long. That's for
too
sure.
damn long.
Yeah.
Yes. There's some rust and some dirt that needs to be knocked off there for sure. I mean, it could take until the end of the season just to get back to the point where I'm like, that's what it's like to go around a track again. Okay. Okay.
Well, what's funny is that High Plains just changed a little bit since Scotty and I have driven it. They've done like the repave on 8 and changed a couple other things. Since you've been there, John, it's had a couple little changes. So it's gonna be like a different, obviously the direction and stuff's the same, but like the pavement and stuff is so different.
Wait, so what changes did they make at High Plains this last year?
They repaved 2 because 2 had basically that ripple in the middle that was just basically killed the line on 2.
Yeah.
And then they repaved 8, basically all of corner 8. And I'm not exactly sure what else. I talked to Sun Chen about it a little bit. And he says, other than it being slick when he went out there, which was like the 2 weeks after they repaved it, he says it's going to be a lot faster.
Oh, really?
So like the amount of speed that you can carry through 8, he says is going to be definitely higher. And then finally 2 is where it always should have been, where 2 was when they went through there and basically had that chop out essentially where they repaved it just a chunk.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just like grip, no grip, grip, no grip. I mean, it was like it was faster really to just take the inside line and just try not to cross over that at all than it was to drive like the traditional, like the line that we usually drive, which should be faster, but wasn't because of how that was paved in. Yeah. And I think they did that like last summer or something like that when they cut all that stuff out. And everybody, even when I was doing WRL stuff, everyone was like, man, what did they do back there? And now I think they fixed up those sections. So I think
that's a good thing.
Other than just a new surface on 8, did they change the shape of that corner at all? Like did they extend it? No. Okay.
It's the same, yeah.
Okay.
It's going to be extended now that so much more, and there's that runoff room on the right side of the track that most people don't even use. Now you know that. So it's going to feel different even from before, but
awesome.
Yeah, the shape is still the same. Yeah.
Nice.
There's just be cones you're looking at now.
Yeah. Okay. Like I can deal with cones. That's fine. It's the rocks and the weeds that scare me.
No.
Just go for it.
No. Well, yeah. 10. I don't think they did anything on 10, but I mean, that's probably like, as far as rocks and weeds go, that's probably the least fun one. I do know that didn't they redo the rumble strip on 10 sometime last year, Scotty? Like on the exit side? I just remember for a while it wasn't painted. And so I didn't know if they like built it up or changed the concrete or something, but fuck, I don't know.
I don't know about that. 10, for some reason, 10 doesn't scare me at all. I've never been off on 10, and I wish I had some wood to knock on that I don't ever go off on 10, because that's one of those corners I just try and take faster and faster every time I go through there.
Yeah. I get like a little chicken shit pucker for me. That's where the cars roll. That's where people roll cars,
That's where they roll? Interesting.
Yeah. They roll on the inside. So they'll go off and then overcompensate, pop back on and just
and then
yeet across the track. And
there's a mountain basically there that you run into.
Yeah. I mean,
I thought that was number 1. Like
people hit the wall at 1, but they don't roll that at 1, I don't think.
Okay.
Yeah, 10 is where people roll, and it's all about that like overdoing it and coming across the track. And then just like Scott said, there's basically like a hill there, probably like the length of a car, like off the track, and then this hill comes up pretty fast. So if you get over there, basically you can get caught up and
was
I saw a car
launched.
roll. Yeah, I saw a car roll at Lemons last year, and I think they had a near rollover, but pretty much trashed a car at WRL last year. So,
Wow.
I mean, it's just one of those corners, I guess.
Good advice of what not to
Surprise!
do. Yeah.
Yeah, don't be scared now.
Have they done anything with the track at La Junta, or is it still just super rough? And
Yeah, so I mean, assuming since you've been the super rough part's probably still like that. But yeah, they extended and put in curbs in spots that I think made the track a lot faster. So like they added and they had some curbing that you probably wouldn't really use, and so like kind of in funny spots. So like I don't know if you're familiar with like what turn one is, but I don't even know if they call it turn one. But basically the right hand sweeper before like the jump, because the jump is still there. They've got
fun.
they have all new curbing there, but you wouldn't really be on that curbing per se, because if you do, I don't know, it just depends. And then they have curbing on the kind of corner 3, which is like basically I'm just going to call 2 a jump, and then corner 3 is that right-hander. So they put like a big run up, like not big run up, but they put a lot of nice curbing there. And it's really nice. Like it's tacky.
On the exit of 3?
On the exit of 3,
okay.
Yeah. So you can really send it on 3 now. And then they've got curbing on the inside and outside of 4 and 5. So like that next right-hander and then that left-hander. And that that inside curb on 4 is nice because you can basically, now you can carry a lot more speed through 3. And then you don't have to bleed off as much speed through 4 and just send it over that curbing. And then you have like a nice little brake zone on 5 and plenty of outside curbing room. 6 is kind of like a little bend, and then 7 is that hard right-hander before the straight. So 6, I think there's a little bit of outside curbing, maybe not, but it's still ripply there. And then there's still tall curb on the inside of 7. So like a car with a big arrow like your car, you wouldn't really want to be up on that curb. But like on my Civic, I would literally drag my fender, like drag my wheel through the inside of it because it was just so much faster. But so yeah, so I mean it's a fun track. I mean, you're going there in April, right? For NASA?
Yeah.
It's it's one of those tracks that like I used to not like. On paper you're like, this is dumb. Like this is a penis shaped track that looks boring, and then you drive it and you're like, man, this is kind of dumb, like a little less dumb. And then when you realize that like you can do 5, 6, 7 laps and like fix stuff and like kind of pick stuff up really fast, because you're like 50-minute, 1 minute, or 50-second, 1 minute laps. Right. Like, and there's a braveness to like the jump. Like we used to joke about it being like the 125 club. Like if you can get to 125 miles an hour before the jump, like then you're really doing so, you're really cooking. And kind of, because usually what happens, turn 1 is kind of like a slow sweeper, but there's like big trees on the outside, and it gets to people. And so they'll brake or slow down between 1 and 2, which is basically the jump. And then, and there's like, you can accelerate all the way through that. And so it's kind of fun because it's one of those corners you can really feel aero on. If you got some speed where you're basically come in and you like lean into it and you're coming through just before the dip and you get the car straightened out, jam on the brakes over the dip, and you're like, oh my God, you're just sitting it. But it's a lot of people will lift, at the end of the straight stretch, whereas it's kind of fun to like really, there's tons of runoff room. So like if you overcook it on the jump, there's nothing out there. It's just concrete, like just flat, like concrete. So it's kind of fun because it pushes you to try and be fast. And I think Ben Council ran like a 52.1 there in his twin turbo vet.
Wow.
So it's going to be like that, as far as I know, has been the fastest street car I've ever seen them. So definitely targeting for like a low 50s would be pretty sweet. So it'll be interesting. I'm excited to see how it goes, especially for the NASA guys, because I don't go there very often. But the SCA guys, they go there twice a year, So sometimes more.
Yeah. All right, Dussex, I got a question for you.
Okay.
So you just went around La Junta in a high place to a certain extent with a great amount of detail about the track. Now, for people like for people that are not in Colorado that are listening to this, like what I want to ask you is how do you learn a track to that detail? Is it by just driving the track a bunch? Is it by talking to everybody else that like what difference does paving this corner make? What difference does this curve make? Like how do you
Mhm.
how did you build that set of information about those tracks?
Well, I mean, I guess it depends on like, there's two ways to think about it. Do you want to learn a track fast, or do you want to learn a track just in general? So, like when I think about high plains, we got tons and tons and tons and tons of laps out there, right?
Mhm.
And tons of time and stuff. And so with high plains, we learned a ton there. And me and Scotty bounced stuff, and we talk about it a bunch. And done endurance racing where you're in the car for hours at a time out there driving it and stuff. And so I feel like for me, high plains, it was in one of those tracks. It was one of those tracks where like I didn't know, and I have just learned from just doing it over and over and over again. And I do track walks now with the SCCA guys and with my friends, and sometimes with TT guys from NASA and stuff. But and we've put our feet on every part of that track where you would drive, and parts
Hmm.
that you didn't think you should drive on, and now you know you should because you've put your feet on it. But you get other tracks like La Junta. I don't actually have a ton of seat time on La Junta as far as days on the track, but because the track is so much shorter, you can drive. You get a lot of laps in a weekend,
It's a
and you get
faster way to kind of learn the track.
yeah, because you're remembering 7 turns, but
Right.
they're a little bit easier because you're not trying to learn. Say Coda is like 22 turns or whatever the
Yeah.
hell it is there.
Yeah.
Like Coda is a lot tougher. But when I go to like a new track, so like when I go to Washington, I'll take like there's a bunch of things I do, but one of the things, the easiest way to really describe it is because people in the paddock will talk about, like, yeah, what are you guys doing up there in turn 7? Or like, when you go to Utah, what are you guys doing over there in Witchcraft? And you don't know what any of these fucking names are. So what I'll usually do is I'll get like a track map that that like somebody like Chen Chen or whoever's like a local like track days or whatever will have out there with the corner numbers, and some tracks like Utah will have names.
Mhm.
And I just try and like memorize those. And then when I'm on the track, I audibly say turn 1, and then turn 2, and then turn 3, turn 4, turn 5, and I say that to myself so that I can build my own repetition with like visual and number. And
Mhm.
then once I kind of get that down, then that's kind of how I could speed learn the track. Then when I'm listening and talking to people in the paddock, I'm not just be like going along with it. I'm like, actually, no, on turn 2, it's a blind corner. Like if you get on the left side of the track and you start having those conversations because
Mhm.
like that's turn 2. And if you get off and they're like, no, turn 2 is a left-hander, like, okay, I was just off. I had like, okay, that's 1A, 1B. Oh so on turn 2, and I
Right.
think that helps, especially if you're a social person
Sure.
where you hear people talking in the paddock, what man, Witchcraft is so scary, or turn 2 is a blind corner, or why does Ryan keep going off on turn 3? I'm like, oh yeah, okay, that's turn 3,
That's
you
turn
know.
3.
Right.
Oh,
Well, and so you go out and count corners, right? But then
Yeah,
you're in Utah and you hear people like talking about the attitudes, and you're like, well,
yeah,
what corner number is that? Like, what
yeah.
the hell are you even talking about? Like, people it's the attitudes, and it's Witchcraft, and it's those things, and you're like, well, but
Hmm.
no, that's turn 14.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
no. So
So you got to figure out the local lingo, as it were,
yeah,
the local dialect.
so a lot of tracks, not a lot, but some tracks you can find the track maps where they'll have it like in parentheses, the
Sure.
attitudes. But one of the reasons why that track is like that, why people call them by their names more than the number, is because there's so many configurations. If you're not even on the same page with what configuration somebody's talking about, like
Mm.
somebody who runs like the West Loop might call turn, they might have a different definition of what turn 10 is than if somebody only does the outer loop,
Right.
and so a lot of those guys will refer to those corners that are like pivotal corners, like the attitude or Witchcraft or whatever, by their name. because that could be turn 11, that could be turn 14, that could be turn 7, depending on what orientation that track is. But like, it's pretty rare to hear somebody call turn 6 Danny's lesson at high plains, because pretty much people run that one configuration. So yeah, or I'll hear people say it. They'll throw me off too, like, oh yeah, like what are you doing through the bobsled? I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, oh, that's 9A, 9B. Like, okay, like, so yeah, so down through turn 9 on full throttle. Like, I don't know, like, why are you asking me such a funny question?
Right.
But so there are some tracks that have those goofy names, you know, but tracks like Utah, I feel like that's uber prevalent because it's got so many configurations that they run.
Well, and the kind of like the deeper reason I asked that is because, like, when you're trying to learn a track, just like you said, like, is the next corner going to be to the left or to the right? Like, you just need to know where you're going. You know, that like there's a point where you just need to get a feel for the track where, okay, I know where I am on the track. Like, if you take 2 turns and you see the 3rd turn, you're like, all right, I'm coming around the back straight. I'm going to be coming up onto the front straight now. That's going to be the end of the lap. Like, you get your orientation for the lap. But the specific details you're going through about, like, the curbs, can you use the curb here? Can you use the curb there or not? Like, that's where, like, you know, like, I think one of the first mysteries is, as far as like, well, why is it that the fastest I can go is a 220 and you're going a 212 around high plains? Well, if I just know where I'm going and I know where the lefts and the rights are, but that's it. But then, you know, like, okay, these are the curbs to use, these are the curbs to stay away from. Like, all of a sudden, like, learning the track to that detail, that's where a lot of that initial bit of pace comes from, because you actually know where you can, like you were saying on turn 8, the runoff, like, nobody uses the runoff, but like, if you use the runoff, you can carry more speed around turn 8, which is a really tight, low speed corner. It's like, okay, well, if you know that there's runoff over there and it's worth using, like, that is a really big piece of information to know. And sometimes it would just come from doing it, but sometimes, like, if you're just like curb averse, like, I don't want to ever hit a curb, like, you might not ever find that information. You know,
they have I think walking the track has helped a lot with that, don't you think, Scotty?
Absolutely. Between walking the track and then data and comparing data and watching your videos, you know, like the first time you're on a track, you essentially just drive it. But then if you actually go and sit down and go through data and watch your lap, and then when you're comparing data with somebody else, and Ryan's like, well, I'm doing 80 through that corner, why are you doing 60? You know, and then comparing data and looking at lines and like, oh, because you can use 4 more feet of the track by utilizing that curb.
Or
it's
the
like
curb.
Turn 14 at Utah, the runoff out there with all those violent rumble strips.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I did my best to avoid that forever, because like, you get on it and it's just, I mean, it's violent. And then we were watching the enduro, and there was this Porsche out there that was like, I mean, he was setting the fastest laps of the night, but he was utilizing every last bit. I mean, at one point there's probably 12 feet of rumble strips out there, and then it goes to 8 feet, and then it goes to 6 feet, and then it goes to 4 feet, and then, you know, you're back on. And he was utilizing every last bit of it. And one of the things I realized after doing it a couple times is the faster you go over there, the less violent it is.
And it's kind of another thing that's kind of funny too, is that it's really more violent right at the white line. And so as you get further away from that, we'll call it the edge of the track, it flattens out a little bit too.
Well, and there's 3 different, I don't know, what do you call it? Rhythms of the rumble strips out there. There's like, the ba 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 ba, and then ba 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 ba, and then, I mean, so it's like the farther you get out, it's like kind of the smoother it gets. But the amount of speed you can carry on track exit there when you utilize all that stuff. And I mean, you know, like you were talking about, John, being like curb adverse, like I don't want to get out there, because the one time I did, it was just like,
the car's gonna fall apart.
But then you watch this Porsche that's doing, I mean, probably 10-12 seconds a lap faster than you, and utilizing all that. It's like, oh, well, I mean, I guess it's worth it for a little bit of violence, you know, to pick up a few tenths out there. So
man, man, I don't have an answer, but it's just like, and maybe it's all of those things. It's walking the track, it's talking to people, it's getting more laps of the track, but it's like, that's the knowledge that you want to like aspire to gain of your local track. And yeah, it's one of those things where I think it gets overlooked, or it's easy to overlook it, especially at the beginning, that like you really need that fine a detail of fine of understanding of the track to really start to go fast.
Yeah.
Yep. It's fun though. I mean, it's why, like, when you go to travel places and people are locals, can just like, you have to really work to even keep up with the locals, because they have the opportunity to know it so well.
Or like Austin Kent at Utah. Like when we got out there, and I mean, that dude is just mind-boggling fast in a TT3 car. Like, I mean, he still got me by 4 seconds out there. But when we got out there on that Friday night, and they did essentially a track walk, I mean, it's a huge track. So they loaded everybody up in these basically like grandstands that they towed behind this car. And they went to a corner, and everybody got out, and everybody got to look at the corner. And Austin was cool enough to be like, yeah, so this is how you take this corner, and this is how you take this corner. And we went through the whole entire track where he gave pointers, and it was just like amazing. And then I blew my car up on the second session and didn't get to utilize a lot of it. So
this year you're going to fix that.
I'm definitely going to fix that in 25 days.
Oh yeah. Yeah, nice. Just in a handful of days.
25 days, huh?
That's March 26th and 27th in Utah.
23 days. 23, 24 days.
I don't math well, but
yeah, it's okay.
I don't even know what today is, so
I think it's October. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
God, I wish it was October. Sometimes I wish it was October. Other times I'm like glad it's like, it's funny is that it feels like there's not enough time to do stuff, but at the same time too, it feels like, God, I want it to happen right. Like, why can't it be right now? You know, I was like, fuck. What happened to my RV? Why did I forget about that until the day I leave? You know, like just silly shit.
Well, what happens in October that you're so excited about?
I don't know. Just
Halloween.
Oh. I like October. It's
Ryan
October is usually when things slow down, and it's just like we're not running the treadmill of the crazy summer season anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Might actually be
October 2nd is usually like the last event, or the beginning of October is usually the last event of the season. I'm really looking forward to the first.
The first event of the season.
Yeah.
Sure.
That is unless you do what do they call it? Super lap battle at Buttonwillow. Then you have a month left.
Right.
Because that's like the second weekend of November, like right after SEMA.
Yep.
Are you planning on going this year, Ryan?
I tried to break it to my girlfriend that her birthday weekend is on that event, so I'm gonna try.
Spoilers. All right.
It's also it's obviously ways out, but I don't know. I mean, beating certain people beating specific people and at Super Lap Battle has really changed a lot of attitudes and how like I'm perceived as a driver here at PPIR. So there could be like, you talk about scope creep. These guys are like, they're way beyond like anything I would have ever thought. And so hopefully that kind of stuff works out. But ultimately Buttonwillow would be like one of those reasons to go out there to make sure like, okay, this is like the last real competition event before COTA.
Well, that's what I was going to say is like all of a sudden now my eyes are open to that last event totally differently because of where it is in California and it's going to be, it should be relatively warm. It could be the same situation like we ran into where you leaving in snow or very cold weather and then you get there and you can actually run again. But it's like, it's a good opportunity to shake a car down to make sure that like, you know what you need to address before you go back to COTA in a couple of months for second Super Lap Battle or next year's Super Lap Battle.
And from like we'll say like a political media standpoint too, it also gives them more knowledge and more information about you. So when you pop up at COTA or that car pops up at COTA or whatever, it's a little bit more of like a defined variable instead of an undefined one. Like the event that, like the COTA event's obviously super cool, and you guys saw it, super big and stuff like that. Button Willow is super cool, and it's a lot of California guys and a lot of crazy shit too. But it's a lot more intimate, if that makes sense. Like
it's a much smaller facility, right?
Yeah, way smaller, like much smaller facility, and then everybody's kind of like more packed in. You know, like it's small enough that like you could hear Cuban talking, you know, on the live stream above you when you're like getting a hot dog. You know, like, and he's like on the second floor of the facility, so it's like it is quite a bit smaller like that. And for Super Lap or Global Time Attack or whatever, for them it's like it's their local track too, so they're from there, you know. So I think it's if you were trying to make like a real solid, and this is why it's like a bigger deal now than it used to be for me, but if you're trying to make a real solid push for the next season, that is like it's the start of the start of the start of the season, if that makes sense. Even
it's
though
the end of the start of the start of the start. It's the start of the end or the end of the start, something like that.
Yeah, it's the end of an end, but the start of a start of a start.
Yeah. Well, it's just like to be able to shake a car down and it, you know, 2 to 3 months before going to COTA, where it's like that those 2 to 3 months, like that's where it's frigid and snowing here. So it's like, man, that's kind of like your last really good opportunity possibly to figure out what your weak spots might be to address them.
Yeah, and that gives you 2.5 months to figure it out before COTA. So
yeah, go ahead, Scotty.
I got to just change subjects real quick and talk about another California track that I get to drive this year, which is Laguna Seca.
Yeah.
And Ryan, you should plan on doing that. You should figure out a way to get and go drive Laguna Seca this year, because that is some bucket list shit right there.
That is 100% bucket list track.
When I was talking to earlier this year with my negotiations with NASA about getting paid and stuff like that, one of the things is like, well, and then if you drive, it'll just be reduced. I was like, dude, I am not worried about driving. I'm more worried about making money. And then they said, oh, by the way, we're going to Laguna Seca, and it's going to be not an open, but like a lifted decibel limit. I'm like, oh my God, why do you got to do this to me? You know, because you do what? You get four time trials weekends is what you need to qualify for time trials. It's going to be expensive. There's no doubt about that. But
I think it's only 3 to qualify for nationals.
Wow.
So I mean, that's just 3 sessions is all I need, is just 3 sessions.
I'll tell you what, I don't think I'm going to do that, but if I could get out there and just do the track walk, that would be a bucket list for me. Just to get to that track and just like be where all that history is. And like, I mean, yeah, that
you guys can't see this.
Crazy.
This is unrelated, but hold on. You guys can't see this, but see how there's 51 messages? That's in the group, and literally they're talking about diffs right now. Brett Cartuccio is talking about diffs with, it's hilarious. Kaiser Cusco just ordered it. FT said that they would be should be here on the 9th. People are getting excited.
Yeah, so it's exciting stuff. It is exciting stuff. What's cool is like getting people being able to work with people that are excited and interested in it to that level. You know, because it's like I'm confident that once they get to that point, and it's funny because we're talking about this, they're talking about that. This is going to go up, fingers crossed, tomorrow. So like they don't know that we're having this conversation. But like it's like that's what gets interesting, because then like what we're working on, I will say a little bit with Tasso, is realizing how much suspension ties into the diff. And to a greater extent than I really had a perspective on. And yeah, so we're going to go down a path, I think, that's going to be pretty interesting, and see what happens for him. And this is for, you know, hill climbs and dirt, but like all of a sudden, like getting this glimpse into some of this rationale of like how you set up a diff and how the diff setup is related to the suspension setup. I was able to ask the right question that scratched the surface, that got all of a sudden this flood of information to release to me last night that I'm still just kind of trying to grapple with an understanding of what I just
from Cusco directly.
from Cusco.
His conversation with Sam at Cusco directly, like,
yeah,
I
those
mean,
guys,
a wealth of information on there. If you know the right questions to ask, those guys can just like blow your mind. John was telling me about some of the stuff that he was saying last night. I'm just like, holy shit! Like, it's really cool. We have that relationship.
It makes total sense, but like I had never thought of like how related those two things could be. And then he's like, oh well, you got to if you have a higher rear spring, then it does this, and so that would mean you would set the diff up this way. But if you have the diff set up this way, then you'd actually have a softer spring rate because it's going to behave this way. It's just like, oh yeah, okay, I get that. Completely did not plan for that, and we're going to have to make a couple quick changes, but that's awesome. And now to like be able to go out there and like try and play with this. I mean, it's like it's like those pieces of the information, like that's the next level where it's like, okay, you get the diff in and it's working, but then you're like, well, but why is it that like I don't have this control or that control? And it's like, well, maybe the car is oversprung, maybe it's undersprung. You know, it's like, and then you like what I'm really excited now is to try and put these two pieces of the puzzle together and see what the result is. And that's going to be really interesting.
That is pretty cool. It's kind of funny is because when they asked me, well, I think it was Brett, when Brett said, hey, should I go Cos or Cusco? I said, definitely do Cusco. And you should definitely get it from Flatirons Tuning because they work with Cusco USA directly and they can have it set up for you, you know? And he's like, well, but I'm just getting a 1.5 way. I'm like, dude, there's so much more to it than just that. I promise you. I was like, and let those dudes, the professionals, you know, the Flatirons Tuning difference is that you can buy this diff from Cusco and it can be set up by Cusco for your application. And that's
what's
and
funny
for them,
is
they're like,
up until last night, I would totally agree with you about the front diff, but not necessarily the rear diff. And now I'm like, damn it, no, the rear's it's the rear too. Yeah, it's everything. It's like, and it's so much like there's layers to it. There's more layers to it. And you know, for guys that are driving the car on the street, and taking it to the track, it's probably something that you'd be less able to take advantage of. But like for a purpose-built race car and stuff, it could be like, you know, if you're chasing that last half second, like this is the difference. This is the difference that'll get you that last half second.
So 17 thousandths of a second between Brett and Ben.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, Cusco USA can set it up, or I can just buy it from Matt Performance. Yeah, I want the one set up by Cusco USA.
Right.
Where is the cause diffs coming from? Like, where's that information? Where did Brett even like consider that as an option?
It's because you know who Lewis Gray is, who's got that like 2015-ish WRX.
Oh yeah. One. He's running one, isn't he?
Yeah, he's running a cause. Yeah, and I mean, I'm not trying to shit talk one way or the other, but I'll just put it like this: you can have a better diff from Cusco set up by Cusco USA, and you're not going to get that from cause. So regardless of what you think about who manufactures one better or the other, I mean, I think there's a clear winner there, but you're not going to get that same level of attention, you know? So, and that's pretty much what I told him. And he said, well, that's because I think it was only like a $200 difference, or maybe it was a $200 difference of who he was looking at buying the Cusco from versus Flatirons. I don't know what it was, but basically I tried to tell him, I was like, getting it set up, it's not just like a one-way diff and you install it. There's more to it than that. You know, the preloads and the ramp angles and all that stuff is adjustable. And if you have somebody who can do it right, then fuck, that's a difference. You know, that's a big difference.
Yeah. And it's, I mean, so there's Cusco, Kaz, and then OS Geiken. Those are the three main diff manufacturers from Japan. And so there's subtle differences. Like OS Geiken is probably the most different. And I think if memory serves, Kaz and Cusco are the most similar. But like it's like I said, like once we've started to like scrape away some of these layers of like how diffs work and what's possible and what can be done with setup, it's like, man, there's a one-way diff, and then there's a one-way diff that is configured for what you're doing, or even just knowing what to ask and like to be able to know what which diff you would want and why. it's really interesting. Like talking with them when I was making the video about how those diffs work, about the difference between the Type RS, which has the coil springs for the preload, and the Type MZ, which has the basically a Belleville washer on
Conical.
top.
Yeah.
And why you would go with one versus the other is really interesting. Having to do with how, like what the ramp up is for that preload and what the breakaway is, and how like they actually recommend in some applications a Type MZ with the Belleville washer for the front diff instead of the cone, the cylinder springs, coil springs, because of the breakaway characteristics and how the lockup progresses differently. It just like, man, it's like finding a tech person at the diff company that has that level of knowledge, and unfortunately with Cusco there's a few of them there that I really enjoy every opportunity I get to pick their brains, and
hell yeah,
it's just going to do nothing but make us all faster.
Yeah, for sure. That Flatirons tuning swagger.
But we're going to do our best. Absolutely. Well, we're coming up on an hour. Is there anything else you guys wanted to talk about? I have a question to throw out if you guys don't have anything else, just as we're wrapping it up.
Good.
No?
What's your question? The
question is, have you guys heard that it sounds like they're trying to bring the WRC back to the United States next year? And the even crazier thing is there's 3 locations. I was reading an article about this that they're looking at. One of them is Washington, because when the WRC was here last, it was in Washington State. Basically, the Olympus Rally is more or less where the WRC ran previously. And this is, I think, 25 or 30 years ago. So it's been a long time. Then there's one location that they're looking at in the Appalachian mountain range. But the third one is on the Colorado-Utah border.
Ooh.
Which
basically like Raleigh, Colorado?
I don't know. I would guess.
I mean, you would assume.
But I mean, there's the Colorado-Utah border is only so long. I mean, like, but what would you think? How cool would it be if the WRC came here again?
That'd be pretty sick.
Oh, yeah.
Especially Colorado.
Yeah, if it was just a couple hours away, like heck yeah, that's pretty crazy. If it is Colorado, Tasso is going to be just he will be once again making the argument that Colorado is the motorsports center of the United States.
Yeah, we've got that. We're locking that down for
That's
sure.
Right. That's right. But it's cool to see that, like, they want to come back. They want to bring that level of rally racing back to those locations. I mean, I hope that can happen, but man, it would be awesome if that was in Colorado, or if at least it was close to Colorado.
I'm pretty jazzed to have relationships and connections in both, like 2 of those 3 locations. Like, I grew up in Kentucky, obviously, and there was this rally that they used to do in like kind of the Ohio, Kentucky area. And this guy who used to set it up, who passed away, they did like a memorial rally, and it was kind of like, think of it like a 0-car rally. And we just all took our like clapped out Hondas and BMWs and just ripped on these rally roads. Like, it was so cool. It was such a fun experience, and it would be awesome if it was like in a similar area, you know. Just wild. For sure.
Definitely.
For sure.
Yes. I don't know. I read that and it's like, boy, that would be cool. I think like rally here in the States is doing well. There's a lot of people that are participating in it and that are excited about it, but it's like the contrast in seeing like what an event like Super Lap is compared to going to, you know, an ARA rally at this point. I mean, you have factory teams at these rallies. I mean, so that's one kind of like elevated difference of some of the rally stuff currently, but like just I think the spectatorship and the fan support, it's like it's much more of a niche with rally, but I think there's a possibility if you can bring the WRC in, and I mean, because it's usually locals. Like, some people will travel the country to spectate a rally, but usually it's like the local rally fans at each rally is who is spectating. But like, man, you have a WRC event, and you're gonna have like people coming in from all over the country, possibly even from outside the country, to just spectate that event. Like, it's gonna elevate rally and make people go like, what? We've been doing this here for like the last 50 years, you're telling me? And oh.
I just started thinking about the accommodations in Rangeley. If they have that in Rangeley, there's very few accommodations in that little town. I mean, it definitely, Rangeley's going to get overrun.
The one article that I was reading was saying that they thought that the Washington was the most likely because it's just outside of Portland. So you've got the biggest population center in proximity of where the stages are.
Have they been near Portland lately?
Supposedly they've been actually scouting since last year.
Okay.
I might have to get Preston back on the podcast and twist his arm as best as I can, but I'm sure he can't tell me anything. It might be fun to try though.
There's no secrets here at PPIR. You want to know it? I'll let you know it.
Okay, deal. All right. Well, with that, unless there's anything else you guys wanted to hit, I think this is as good a place as any to wrap it up for this episode.
I'm good.
No? All right.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Well, once again, thank you very much for tuning in. Thanks for your support as always. And until next time, stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning.
Go buy a limited slip differential.
Go buy a limited slip differential. Talking to you, Trey. All right.
Thanks everyone for tuning in to the Flatirons Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. Once again, we'd like to let you know that your support is what makes this show possible. Be sure to check out our online store at flatirons.com for any of your aftermarket or OEM Subaru parts needs. And as always, stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning.